My name is Travis Harrell. I am the Director of Emerging Technology here at EVOTEK. I have the privilege of working in the EVOTEK Labs group, which is our innovation team. And the session that we've got coming up, I'm assuming we're going to bring in our participants in just a moment, is a VC panel where we're going to get a chance to peel back the curtain and really discuss some venture trends with representatives from three fantastic VC firms. In my past life, oh, looks like they're joining, and I'll introduce them just a moment. In my past life as an IT leader, I would say that I knew that venture capital existed, but I didn't really understand the importance of it all. Right? I mean, it's just like, yeah, there's money. These guys have money. It's a big mystery box. But really, venture capital plays an important role in the development and growth of emerging technologies and other technologies for a number of obvious reasons. One is the most obvious is funding, but there's a couple other reasons that folks don't always think about, such as expertise. Venture firms oftentimes have experience evaluating technologies and building companies, hopefully, and bringing new innovations to market. They also can attract talent because, well, for one, credibility, right? Who's going to want to jump to the newest startup if they have a solid career at Meta? But somebody injects a couple million into that, might be a little more likely to jump ship. Also, of course, you've got speed of market, scaling capabilities, and so I would say that the overall venture market has been a little bit tumultuous in the last couple of years. And I think I'd like to introduce our panelists so we can discuss a little bit more. First, we've got Gaurav Manglik from Westwave Capital. Gaurav, could you give a little introduction about yourself and about your organization?
Absolutely, Travis. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm with Westwave Capital. We are an early stage venture firm based here in Silicon Valley. I'm here in my home office in Palo Alto. And so, as a firm, we like to invest in really early stage startups. And, these are startups that are what we call pre-product market fit. They're typically raising their first round of capital, what's called a pre-seed or a seed round of money. Typically founders are looking for anywhere from 2 million to 5 million. And so, that's where we come in. These are really early stage startups. There's no revenue traction typically. If at all, they have, very early revenue. Many of them are even pre-product. And we tend to focus on really deep technology startups in the enterprise B2B space. We call them digital building blocks. They tend to be in areas like cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, cloud security, horizontal SaaS applications, analytics, so forth and so on. And I don't really call out AI there. I know AI is the hot topic, but we really see AI as empowering capabilities and features in those particular areas. So, that's what we do as a firm. My background is a little atypical when it comes to VC. I started my career as a software engineer, became an entrepreneur. I had a company called Clicker Technologies back in 2010, sold it to Cisco in 2016. And then, I went over to, as they say, the dark side. I became a venture capitalist. So that's a little bit about me and my firm.
Well, thank you so much, Gaurav. We'll definitely touch on a couple of those topics in a little bit. And next up, I would like to introduce Lee Haney. Lee, could you give us a little intro?
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all today. I've been at Greylock for about 5 years, and I spend most of my time working with our portfolio companies, kind of on exactly what Travis was describing in terms of helping build in those early days. We're very hands-on as a firm. Greylock as a whole, this may be a recurring theme today among the panel. We like to focus as early as possible. We often talk about how the ideas for the startups that we back are born on whiteboards in our offices. So we'll sometimes invest pre-idea and then incubate those companies in our offices. Palo Alto Networks and Workday are two examples of companies that we did that with. And it's super fun, of course, but in many ways also, how do you envision what these things are going to become when the person that's going to go build them may not even know what it is yet. That early stage investing spans basically everything that's across the software stack, consumer, enterprise, and within enterprise, everything from the ever important topic of cybersecurity to SaaS applications, software defined infrastructure, observability, and everything under the data kind of like entire umbrella, which again, I agree with Gaurav. Try not to use the two-letter acronym too often, but I am sure we're going to talk more about it today.
No, I think we're done talking about AI, actually. No, obviously, our last but not least panelist here, we've got Seth Spergel from Merlin Ventures. Seth, could you give us a little bit of an intro?
Sure. Thanks, Travis. So I think, like Lee and Gaurav, we also focus on very early stage companies. The difference with Merlin is we are exclusively cybersecurity focused. And I guess the background on the company, where we came out of is we've got a sister company that works helping companies in the US federal space. So we initially created Merlin Ventures. The idea was to find early stage companies that we thought we could bring into the federal market. And we still look for that, right? We're really looking for enterprise relevance. Excuse me, getting over COVID here. So I apologize if I'm a little stepped up while I'm doing this. But what we've evolved to over the last few years is really looking at the earliest stage companies, looking for that relevance to large enterprise markets like the government, but also like financial and insurance, investing in them at the very beginning. We'll go up to Series A, but typically we're looking to be in that first investment. And really helping them get their commercial footing under them so they can eventually grow into the federal market as well. A big part of that is helping them just navigate the US market because most of our investment focus is on the Israeli market. So we've got a team in Israel that's very well embedded in that ecosystem, and being cybersecurity focused, obviously that's a huge area for Tel Aviv. So we tend to do most of our deal flow from Tel Aviv, find those companies early on, help them understand how to work in the US market with our connection to various security leaders. And then as they grow, we can also help them come into larger markets like federal.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Seth. And actually, you came from QTEL, I believe, at one
QTEL,
point, which is a strategic investment firm in the U.S. Intelligence Committee. So I imagine you've got some James Bond-like gadgets somewhere stashed. But you were also, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
But even more importantly, you were part of ThinkGeek. And I know that they don't exist anymore, but for those of us nerds out there, it was really a fun site.
Yeah, it's actually
touch
funny.
on any of those experiences?
Yeah. So when I joined InQtel, actually, I came and I said, I don't really have the background to be doing this sort of stuff. And they were like, "Are you kidding? Working in a toy company is a great background for working here." So I spent far too long at IBM and sort of needed a detox after that. So had a chance to go be the VP of engineering at ThinkGeek, which was as you said, a no longer existing geeky sort of toy and clothing company. So worked there for a couple of years, got the IBM out of my system. And then when that sort of went away due to some various issues with investors and things like that, went over to InQtel, which is a VC that was created by the CIA in 1999, I think 99. And the idea behind InQtel was a lot of the innovation that had historically happened in government-funded research labs had moved to the commercial world, right? And you see this now in the explosion of startups and venture-backed startups that are creating all sorts of new innovations, right? We talked about the AI word, right? I mean, you look at OpenAI and all these other companies that have come out of that. The government labs struggle to keep up with a lot of this stuff. And as that research shifted over to, or as that innovation and IP shifted over to the commercial market, the government, the CIA in particular, realized they were being cut out of it. And that startups didn't know how to work with the government, and the government didn't know how to work with startups, but VCs did. And so the CIA brought together some people outside the agency to create this nonprofit VC to go invest in startups and help bridge that gap to bring them into the intelligence community.
Wow, that's really fascinating. And I imagine most of this audience probably had no idea that InQtel even existed. So really interesting insight. I know it's a dirty word here, AI. We were going to kind of skirt around it, but I think we should get this elephant out of the way first, right? There's so much hype swirling around AI. And I know, Gaurav, you mentioned that you don't even really mention it specifically, but you guys do all invest in AI companies. How on earth, you do, how on earth do you determine what to invest in? I don't know. Lee, why don't you go first?
On the whole, this feels like everything is still so early in the AI journey. The iPhone was released in I think it was 2007, but Uber and Airbnb and like the big killer apps that we all think of when it comes to mobile took several more years on the other side of the Great Recession. So I think it feels a little bit like we may be at a point in time where there are some what feel like obvious conclusions about the importance of the category without the ability to project who those are going to be. So there's a big and that's not just in terms of individual names. It also, kind of just fundamental questions like, do big models or small models win in the long run? Which really informs, is it going to be the big incumbents or is it going to be startups that can really capture a lot of the value here? And that feeds into questions around, vertical and horizontal solutions versus kind of all-purpose models. There's so many questions that are just not answered at a basic technical level yet. While we're all kind of, on this speeding train of AI that does not appear to be slowing down or stopping anytime soon. So to some extent, despite venture capitalists being maybe at the front edge of this, it still feels like an unlimited amount of uncertainty ahead of us.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating answer, and I do tend to agree with much of it. Now, when you talked about the big guys versus the small guys really diving in here, it just reminded me, yesterday I saw an announcement that Microsoft is, I think, funding Y Combinator with free AI GPU compute, right? So that's one way for the big guys, I think, to help the little guys. But anyway, I digress. Gaurav, I'm curious to hear your take on that question about, AI investments.
Yeah, absolutely, Travis. I tend to agree with Lee that it's still pretty early days, but I guess to kick it off, I'd say that the hype around Gen AI is a lot more real than the last darling of the VC world, which was blockchain. And this feels a lot more real. I think there's more solidity to the technology and the promise of Gen AI. Now, having said that, I think Gen AI, it's one of the reasons it's so hard to fund startups in Gen AI is Gen AI has really made AI easy for everyone, right? So before Gen AI came on the scenes, AI was hard. It required technical expertise. It required ML scientists to implement ML, machine learning. But Gen AI has made AI easy for everybody. So I have a small anecdote from one of my portfolio companies where they actually had a dedicated AI person and machine learning person. But after the whole Gen AI thing came on the scenes, the first person they let go was that machine learning person, because the technical, the engineering team could just use Gen AI on their own, right? So one of the challenges in funding Gen AI startups is that anybody can do it, right? It's a lot easier for existing incumbents to implement Gen AI. So one of the things that we look as a VC in this early era of Gen AI is this startup, if it's an application on top of Gen AI, is this something that's easily done by a larger incumbent? And if not, then what are the reasons behind it? Is there a significant workflow moat or a data moat that's going to be harder for an incumbent to implement? So that, as a VC, I think over the past 9 to 12 months, we must have seen 100+ Gen AI startups. But if it's at the application layer, I think that's one of the key concerns that we have when funding a startup. And it's still early days, but one of the things that I think may pan out, if I were to make a bet, this is a bet I made in the cloud space approximately 10 to 15 years ago. Back then, Amazon AWS was really that brought cloud onto the scenes. And the bet that we made was that Amazon's not going to be the only cloud, it's going to be a multi-cloud world. And I think when we look at the more foundational, the more infrastructure layers of Gen AI, clearly OpenAI is way ahead of the curve here right now. But one of the theses that we have is that maybe the world's going to be a multi-LLM, multi-foundational model world. It's not just going to be one model that's going to rule it all. But again, things are very early, and it's a very fast-moving space.
Yeah, and you did mention OpenAI being ahead of the curve, although we've got some folks from Anthropic here coming up later that I think might disagree with some of that. I've had some really interesting conversations with them. Not that your opinion isn't valid here. Seth, what's your take on all this?
So I knew I shouldn't have caught up with Gaurav on investment strategy yesterday, because I was going to say the same thing, which is I think it's become so easy now that AI, you can't build an AI company, right? Unless you are like OpenAI or Anthropic, right? It's really more about using AI to augment some other special sauce you have. And so we see companies that say, hey, look, we found a way to do this because, we use AI and now we can start to look at new data sources that we never could before. But when you dig in, they don't have any special expertise in that. They don't have any, exceptional knowledge of how to use LLMs. They're smart people who looked at what's publicly available and did something. And that, to Gaurav's point, I think is not particularly defensible. But if you're building a really strong solution in a domain that you know really well, and AI lets you make it better, that to us is more interesting, right? Because then the defensibility of the solution is not the AI. The defensibility of the solution is the solution as a whole. And so that's, I think, where we have to focus right now, because it has become very easy to just spread it on like peanut butter and say, look, I got an AI solution.
Yeah, that's a great point. You need to make an actual product. The AI is a piece of it, right? It's like saying I'm making a computer company. Well, good for you. We all are. That's what this industry is all about. I've seen your portfolios, and obviously AI is not all of your investments. What are some key investment trends that you are following right now that aren't specifically, on the AI track?
Who are you asking?
I guess all of you, but let's go with Gaurav.
Yeah, I can go first. It's hard to avoid AI today, Travis. I mean, even if it's a non-AI investment, at some point in time, there's going to be some intersection. The core product is, say, around cybersecurity, cloud security, core infrastructure. Maybe AI is not at the core of it, but at some point in time, the startup's going to have some feature or capability driven by AI. So it's kind of hard to avoid AI. But as a firm, we used to look at hardcore infrastructure stuff. So as an example, in the cloud space, and Seth knows my background from Clicker, but that's a space that's been evolving. So we have put a bet on Kubernetes and containers. So we have a startup called Spectral Cloud that does automated Kubernetes management across cloud and edge environments as well. And in the belief that the world's always going to be hybrid, not just containers, that startup Spectral Cloud also helps manage VMs and containers from the same Kubernetes interface. So that's an example of a non-AI startup. But they have some really interesting AI things that they're doing as well. For example, deploying AI models to the edge in a very efficient fashion. They're internally using AI for things like troubleshooting ops environments. But that's an example of an investment that I would call a non-AI investment. There are several others. We have a company called Solar.io, which is also in the similar space. It's a service mesh startup, and that's also non-AI.
How about you, Seth? I got to change the order around a bit.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, one area I like right now is actually, I think the last speaker, Modi, was talking about this, right? AI not replacing humans, but humans using AI doing things better. So one area that we've made a recent investment in is like tech-enabled services, right? Using AI to make people a lot more efficient and allowing them to deliver MSP-style services in a much more scalable way than they could have historically done. Right. So instead of needing to just throw people at the problem and looking at screens and trying to figure out what's going on, build a system that maybe doesn't solve all the problems using AI, but solves enough of them that a deeply trained expert can leverage that to solve much harder problems for their customers. So that's been an area of interest. And I mean, frankly, it's not necessarily a new area, right? I mean, you've had companies like Expel and others doing solutions like this for a few years already. But I think with LLMs now opening up the types of data you can look at, these solutions tend to get even more interesting. And then I think the other place, right, and this isn't all that new either, but at the same time keeps expanding its importance, is just identity, right, and identity security, and how you better leverage identity to, find what's going on in your systems, secure those systems. Identity really is the firewall today, right, and it controls all the access to everything. And we're seeing solutions that are trying to push more fine-grained identity controls down into systems, but also give you the leverage to see what's going on across all of them.
Talk about another crowded market, identity, but crowded for good reasons, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Seth, by the way. Lee, what about your investment strategies, outside of AI right now? What are you trending with?
I'll say all of the above in terms of what Seth and Gaurav discussed. So definitely agree with both of them. And just to maybe highlight something a little bit fun, we were early investors in a lot of social media companies: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Musical.ly, which became TikTok. So that's still a space that we're really looking heavily at on the consumer side. watch out for, I guess, what your teenage kids are using, and tell us what you think, good or bad.
Yeah, watch out. Goodness, talk about chaos with all the social media. I try to filter some of it out, but we can't, right? It's so embedded into our everyday lives. Another direction I'd like to go here is really when I think tech, I think Silicon Valley. I think VCs in Silicon Valley, but really only one of you guys is located there. And I know, Seth, you touched a bit earlier on, the Israeli ecosystem, just slightly. But Seth, you can start this one off. How do you see different global regions and how they compare in terms of like investment attractiveness?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we focus on Israel because there's a lot of stuff to invest in over there. And also, frankly, because it's where we have the deepest reach, right? We can find the companies at the stage we want over there where Silicon Valley is a very crowded space. And I live in DC. So not being in Palo Alto makes it very hard to actually find those companies before everybody else already has. So a lot of the investive attractiveness is going to vary by investor based on where they have feet on the ground and the reach to see what's going on. In terms of just overall general regions, I mean, the US obviously is a huge player here. Israel, I think, has done some really interesting things to encourage the tech ecosystem and the cybersecurity ecosystem in particular, with how they have just sort of built this flywheel of taking technology. Well, so to step back for a second, right? The way military service works over there in Israel, right? And they have this group called 8200, which is their NSA. It's the largest unit in the Israeli military. And when people go through that group, unlike here in the US, where you go through as an individual and come out the other end as an individual, there you go into the military, at 17 and do your compulsory military service as a cohort of people. And that cohort works together for 3 to 6 years and comes out the other end now knowing how to work together and how to solve a problem. And around that, they've built up this whole ecosystem of investors, other entrepreneurs have already been through that journey who are willing to mentor those people. And all that together now allows you to just get this flourishing ecosystem of startups. And that's really the key to finding the geographic hotspots, right? Is there that ecosystem there? In Palo Alto and San Francisco, right, you can't throw a stone without hitting a VC or a startup, right? And so, like, I talk to friends over there and they're like, oh, yeah, so-and-so from Sequoia lives behind my house here and we talk over the fence, right? And my kids play soccer with, this person from Facebook, right? And like, it's almost incestuous. But it's that tight-knit ecosystem that you need in order to really have a successful, place to invest.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated with the 8200 connection. And sometimes when we're evaluating companies in labs, we see 3 or 4 companies that all kind of have very similar technologies. And then you look at the background and you see these guys are all in the same 8200 unit. And I think,
Yes.
I mean, that's what a bizarre, is
So
it
it's
just
a fun game. Try to figure out what they did based on what their startup does.
it's like a competition between them? I mean, I guess they're all sort of winning at the end, right? If the companies do well. Lee, what's your take on global regions as far as investment strategy, and what does that all mean to you?
Yeah, and this became a much more, I guess, tangible question, especially when COVID hit and kind of people scattered all over the place. And I guess, to the extent that there are, hotspots or pockets of density, it's a good thing when there's a broader diversity of where ideas are coming from. I mean, I don't know how many times a day it's, Silicon Valley is referred to as a bubble, and, it's without new ideas coming in from other places, that we might only be investing in and finding social media companies. And that's probably not what the world really needs. So things like the density of talent and great ideas coming out of Israel for cybersecurity, or LA or New York or Miami, increasingly Austin and Seattle, having these other places where there are maybe different ties. So, Boston, for instance, was the historical headquarters of Greylock for several decades. And there was a lot of investment in healthcare and biotechnology. That's still the case for Boston. And that's a good thing to have kind of these areas of specialization. So I guess when we think about where we go and where we're looking to invest, oftentimes it relates to kind of like what's the topic and what is the special sauce of that area of density. When it comes to AI, maybe there's a lot going on in the Bay. But I can tell you it is worth us getting on planes and going to Israel on a regular basis because of just the quality of entrepreneurs who are based there. And to Seth's point, how many of them come out of 8200 and other units every single year?
Yeah, wow. Although I don't know that you can jump on a plane and get to Israel at the moment, right? That's a tricky one. Maybe we'll dive into that a little bit. But before we do, Gaurav, you obviously did not originate in the Bay Area, but you ended up there, right? What's your take on this whole, global region innovation and investment strategies?
Yeah, Travis, I think I've seen a lot change over the past 20 years, and the one thing that was always there was the engineering and product teams were pretty distributed, even pre-COVID. For example, my startup, we had a major hub in India, and then we had remote development in Europe as well. And then as we grew, we had sales teams all over the place. So teams were always remote and distributed, even pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID intensified that. But I think what's changed is that good ideas are getting formed everywhere in the world, in India, in Israel, in Europe. In the past, companies struggled in validating those ideas in those geographies because most of the early adopters used to be here, right? And so getting that validation was hard. But now we are beginning to see companies in these geographies getting, early adopters. There are enterprises willing to put their bets on early stage startups, at least validate the idea. So we're seeing more startup formation in geographies outside Bay Area, in other countries as well. So we are open to investing in companies that are non-Silicon Valley based. In fact, we've done that many times over. But it's still helpful at some point of time to expand your presence here. There's still a very rich ecosystem of investors, advisors, folks can really, beyond that idea validation, help you scale that startup. So yeah, things are changing, but there's still a lot of expertise and a lot of energy here still in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I think what I got out of that from all of your answers is just the diversity of ideas is important. And I think that's what's really changed in the landscape in the last 20 years versus, everything being Bay Area based tech in the 90s, right? It's really kind of shifted, I think, everybody's views and ideas on what's important. You guys have some recent investments that I would be curious if you'd like to highlight. Seth, you've got a couple that recently went M&A. I don't know if you'd be interested in chatting about any of both recent investments as well as M&A.
Yeah, so it was a good week this week, or I guess over the last week, we had Palo acquire Dig and Talon for close to $1 billion combined, which was nice and frankly faster than we expected for both of them. So those two, I mean, it's I think if you ask any of the three of us, like when you're investing at this stage, it really comes down to the founders more so than anything else, because typically there's not even technology to validate yet at the time you're doing the investment. And both Dan, the CEO of Dig, and Ofer, the CEO of Talon, are just amazing CEOs to watch operate and see how they run the companies. And that, I think, is reflected in what happened here. So those two have obviously been great. I touched on one that's doing sort of the tech-enabled services, right? And using AI to really scale people around managed service. So that's a company called Tamnoon that's doing stuff for, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, my internet connection froze for a second there. That one is doing stuff around basically optimizing management of CNAP and CSPM solutions, right? Because these solutions have just gotten so big now that you need a whole team of people just to manage them. And so using AI to make it so that one person can manage 10 instances instead of the other way around. That's one. And then the other one I'll bring up is around kind of cybersecurity search across the entirety of your cyber infrastructure. So a company called Cyclops that's looking at all the different cybersecurity tools in an ecosystem, how they map together from an API perspective, and then allowing users to ask very complex questions around it. So moving towards this cybersecurity mesh, where you take all the different pieces you've already got in your ecosystem and turn them into a platform, as opposed to just separate pieces you've got to manage on their own.
I may be a little bit biased, but I really, really like Cyclops. I think that it's a cool technology. I know we had a chance to evaluate them a few months back, uh, but again, congrats on the Talon and Dig. And I will echo. I think those two founders. I've had a chance to meet them as well. Amazing, amazing. So it sounds like the people was really the driving factor here. Not necessarily. Well, the technology is great too. Don't get me wrong, but the people really help.
Yeah. No, and what we heard over and over was like, look, the technology is amazing, but it's a crowded space, and it's the teams of these two companies that just made customers fall in love with them.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I couldn't help but smile when I had a chance to meet Ofer. He just has this like energy to him. But
yeah.
Anyway, Lee, I actually saw today there was an investment in, I think, Greenlight. I don't know if you're a part of that, but it looks like it's an AI staff augmentation for compliance. You guys also invested in Upwind, a runtime cloud security product. Any particular investments you'd like to highlight, or M&A? Anything in that space you'd love to touch on? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I appreciate you paying such close attention to the recent investments. So Greenlight, I think, is just a good example of a number of the AI investments we've been looking at lately that are very narrowly focused on a specific use case. So I think it was Seth who brought up earlier about, it's not just that the AI or the LLM specifically itself, it's the total solution. So being able, so when it comes to, say, compliance teams, or even invest in another company that does legal research called Responsive for in-house general counsels, finding use cases where there's a very narrow kind of like corpus of data and a kind of like very specific need that a business has. There can be really appropriate places for AI to be used when you know exactly kind of what are the types of data inputs that are going to come in, even if you don't know what the data that you expect to see is itself. And in the case of, say, making compliance decisions or legal research, allowing a human to make much better informed decisions faster with less effort, especially when it comes to high cost employees like attorneys. Those are places where, it just seems like kind of obvious places in a business where it'd be useful to be able to have a sidekick. The word co-pilot comes up all the time, but to allow you to just be more effective in your job. It's not a matter of replacing these people, because at the end of the day, clearly a legal team is not going to take. You can't transfer the liability for a decision to an AI. That's still got to sit in a human's hands, which maybe relates a little bit to the dual use technology investing that some of us may come in and around. Maybe a separate topic on AI here. But I think that's one of the most interesting things we're seeing in AI, beyond kind of like the foundation model and infrastructure pieces that remain super important. And then on the cybersecurity side, you mentioned Upwind. I don't want to repeat anything Seth mentioned around CNAP, but just, that piece of allowing CISOs to figure out how to do their job without just adding more and more tools, which to some extent may just be the nature of the way security is going. But being able to give them more power to kind of see the entire landscape and orchestrate it and manage it is a big piece of the puzzle. I hope that there's some things we're working on there that I hope I'll be able to share more broadly, within a matter of weeks or a month or two here.
Interesting. I actually really appreciate you coining the term sidekick. I'm tired of the co-pilot term as well. Gaurav, you have obviously a great portfolio. I've had a chance to take a look at Discern Security. They're one of the interesting ones we've been following. Are there any that you'd like to highlight? And, Discern could be one of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Travis. I mean, we have a pretty large portfolio. We are a very active investor, so we make about a new investment every month, and they're all like your children. So it's hard to pick, a couple out of the 60 that we have right now that are active. But maybe I'll just quickly start with Discern because you mentioned that, and then cover a couple that is sort of very close to my heart as a software engineer. So, Discern, the idea around Discern, the thesis is that CISOs already have all the tools today they need right? More and more security tools are only creating more alerts for the CISO. And more often than not, it's not a technology issue, it's a people and process issue when it comes to cybersecurity. And so the idea behind Discern, it's an amazing team. It's a repeat founding team. Their last startup was called Security Advisor. What they're doing with Discern is they integrate with the existing security portfolio that a CISO might have, and they will discover all the policies. Now, what they have found is that most security teams are not able to catch up and automate policies as much as they should, especially in the context of who's the employee, what's the end device, and what's your overall security environment. So Discern goes in, automatically sucks your policies, and uses AI to configure policies dynamically over time. And it does that in the context of who's the employee, what other security tooling do you have in place, and it basically reduces that burden on the security team. So, we're really excited about Discern. That's one. Maybe a couple that I can talk about, especially that I was a software engineer in the past, and a lot of the engineering work that I used to do was pretty boring. I think a lot of that can be automated by AI sidekicks. I'm going to steal that word, Lee. So there's one company in our portfolio called Unscript, and it helps with developers that are having to do ops work. They're having to troubleshoot their production environments. And what Unscript does is they use a generative AI to first run health checks, for example, on your Kubernetes clusters, on your cloud environments. And then based on the results of those health checks, or if there's an incident coming in, they use Gen AI to automatically create troubleshooting workflows in Python scripts that you can run on Jupyter notebooks. So it's using Gen AI to automatically help developers troubleshoot environments and then also take that further into remediation. In the past, people have used approaches like runbooks that tend to be pretty static. They don't work all the time. But here's a real application of Gen AI to help developers more around troubleshooting. And then another one that I'm going to quickly mention, it's a company that's in stealth mode. They're going to come out of stealth very soon, but I'm probably spilling the beans before I should, and I hope the founder doesn't mind it. It's a company called Fractal. It's kind of crazy, but it's a new programming language. And it's a new programming language that's Gen AI friendly. So, if you were to use Gen AI to generate code for an entire application stack, it's going to make mistakes. If you're going to use Java or Python, these are fairly, I joke when I say low-level programming languages, but the amount of code that's going to get generated, they're going to be bugs, they're going to be mistakes. So Fractal is a higher-level programming abstraction that's more similar to natural language. And so a user can describe basically what application they want in natural language, and the Gen AI will generate code in Fractal, which we're going to open source as a programming language. So that's a pretty interesting project.
Wow.
Stealth mode is going to come out of stealth pretty soon, but I am planning to write a few applications using Fractal pretty soon.
Well, you heard that here first, audience. There's a stealth mode a stealth company you just learned about, which is pretty cool. We get a chance to dive into some of those in labs, and it's just fascinating. But we usually can't spill the beans, so I'm glad you were able to. I know we're getting closer on time. We've got about 7 minutes. There's a few questions from the audience, and I'll dive into those in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to dive into a couple touchy subjects, possibly. Seth, we've touched on the Israeli companies a bit.
Yeah.
Israel's no stranger to conflict, of course. But what can you share about the state of affairs there? And I know the human element is much more important than business, but how is this impacting the tech community?
Yeah. So, like you said, this is not the first time Israel is in a war, but I do think the scale of this is different than past, going back to the founding of the country, right? So this is definitely having an impact on people. And almost every company you talk to, including ours, right, has team members who have been called up to active duty and are short-staffed. And so, yes, there's that impact. But I will also say that the resiliency of the people that work there, right? And again, this is not the first time they've had to figure out how to work in a war zone, right? They're figuring out how to get around it, right? They are backfilling people, right? People are working extra hours. They are making sure the work gets done. And when I talk to CEOs, right? So we talked about Cyclops before. When I talked to Ron, the CEO there, he said, look, I really appreciate all the well wishes I'm getting from everybody, right? Everybody's calling to make sure I'm okay. And it's amazing. But I also need people to know that we're open, right? We need to get back to business. The hugs are great, but I need some POCs and actually, let people know that they can still work with us, right? Like we can still deliver everything, and we will make sure that anything that we would have delivered before, we will still deliver now. We may just have to work a couple extra hours here and there to get it done, but we will get it done. And that's been the overarching message I've heard from every company I've talked to there.
Wow, powerful resilience. I can actually share. There's times when I'm on meetings with folks in Israel, and I'm sure this has happened to you quite a few times, and they have to leave the meeting because the Iron Dome is shooting down missiles. And I mean, this is something that's happened before the war. I mean, this happened multiple times in the last year. So just for those that aren't familiar, it's an interesting ecosystem out there, and they have to live, with that every day. So really amazing resiliency. Thank you, Seth, for sharing some of that. Lee, you have a unique history as well, like you all do. You were in military, investment banking, tech, and then venture. How were you guided down this path?
I'll keep it brief, but just related to the Israel point. So I served in the Marines, U.S. Marines, and one of my favorite sayings was that adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And I think that the relationship between CISOs and these Israeli founders in particular has just deepened so much over the last several weeks, because on one side, I don't know that I've met a CISO that hasn't had a deep empathy for what's going on and understanding and being flexible to try to support the Israeli entrepreneurs going through what none of us can really imagine. And on the flip side, just the level of delivery coming from those entrepreneurs is absolutely incredible, given everything that's going on. So, I think that, I don't even want to call it a silver lining, but one thing that I hope we can all look back on positively is just how much closer we all are becoming because of kind of like what people are showing through this adversity. I'll just say, in terms of my own path, the Marine Corps, I could have never imagined being in venture capital or probably any of these experiences. The one thing that I remember learning in grad school, I was told, is that the best thing to do for anything, whether it's your career or work in business, just anything at all, is finding opportunities to create productive accidents. And once I learned that term and kind of what that meant, it felt like, if I want to do anything related to tech, go into the Bay was the place for that to happen, because you can't help but bump into, like the comment about the neighbor talking over the fence, or, if you're in Chicago, you're going to bump into someone in a bar, you're going to probably talk about sports. If you bump into someone in a restaurant in the Bay, you're going to be talking about AI or something fascinating. And I think that's exactly how it played out for me. So maybe related to the original point of these kind of tech hotspots, is that physical proximity to people working on interesting things is hard to beat.
Oh, well, I do want to give one moment for this audience question. I know we're coming up on time. The audience is asking, or somebody in the audience, what are your thoughts on existing and future industry government regulations on AI technologies? And do you think it will reduce innovation by startups? And Gaurav, I'll throw this one your way.
It's still very early days to say, Travis, but I've always believed that's not going to stop innovation, right? In fact, it might even foster innovation in many cases, right? I think having governance, having compliance is really key. I mean, we already have that in non-AI areas like security. And in my opinion, it helps startup founders actually start the right way and have those concerns addressed from day one, rather than those being, an afterthought. And so, I don't think it's going to curb innovation. It's going to make innovation maybe stronger. And then when it just comes to compliance, responsible AI safety, there are actually a lot of opportunities to fund startups in those areas as well. So I see it more as an opportunity than actually something that's going to curb innovation.
Interesting. Well, I'll give you folks, Seth, Lee, any thoughts on that? I'll give you a moment here.
Maybe just one additional piece is, the latest news is the regulatory piece, but something that's just a kind of an incredibly large trend that is not going to change anytime soon is the passage of the CHIPS Act and all the industrial policy efforts that have come into place in the last 24 months. The amount of funding and money going into this world is not going to be, I think, slowed down by individual pieces of regulation. I struggle to imagine innovation being anything beyond outside of what we're all talking about here today over the next 2 to 5 years.
Seth, any differing opinions there?
I don't think it's going to. I mean, hopefully there are some sane guardrails that are put onto the market in terms of how AI is used, right? Just like we see it with data, right? In terms of, what companies can do with our data. And I think what we've seen so far is they tend to be probably lighter than they even should be in a lot of ways. And our data gets sold and reused in ways that maybe it shouldn't always. So I'm not super concerned that the government regulation, especially when you've got multiple countries working on this sort of technology, is going to stop us from creating things. To Gaurav's point, I mean, look at how many companies popped up because of GDPR to help companies get better visibility into their data and where it is and how it flows and all that. So yes, there may be some headaches associated with it, but I don't think it's going to stop forward progress.
Interesting. A lot of opportunistic companies starting up as well, right, to regulate AI. Well, we could talk forever, it sounds like, and I know we're already over time, and I would love to ask even more questions, but I guess we'll have to do that in MTEK 2024 or some other session. Seth, Lee, Gaurav, this was fantastic. Really, really interesting to hear all of your thoughts on all these different technologies and companies. Again, thank you so much for your time. Really, really applaud you on all of your authentic answers. We didn't get into anything too crazy, which is good as well. But man, amazing. Thank you all so much. And well, I hope you stick around for some of the rest of this MTEK if you can. It sounds like we've got Jacob coming up after the break. It's going to be awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.